Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. Joining me in the studio this evening via Skype, we have our regular contributors, Day Tucker, our Rural Affairs correspondent. Welcome back to the show, Day.
Thank you.
Okay, and sitting on my other side this evening is Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialist Group. Welcome back to you as well, Chris.
Good evening, Gordon.
Okay, without further ado, I'm going to dive straight into the coronavirus update. And as of 2 o'clock today in Scotland, there have been a total of 120,601 coronavirus tests concluded. And of these, 105,048 tests were confirmed negative. 15,553 tests were positive. 658 people were in hospital last night, 18 of whom were in intensive care, with another 10 suspected COVID-19 in intensive care. This marks an increase of 49 confirmed new cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infection has sadly risen now to 2,395. This number only includes those who have died in hospital after receiving a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 39,904 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 176. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. And now to our main stories. Boris Johnson must set the record straight over representations to Donald Trump on the US protests. The SNP's Westminster leader has written to Boris Johnson to ask if he has made any representations to Donald Trump over the ongoing Black Lives Matter protests in the United States, and if the Prime Minister will now review UK exports of riot control equipment to the US after the Prime Minister failed to provide answers at Prime Minister's questions. Ian Blackford MP has called for the Prime Minister to raise criticism of the US administration if he has not already done so. In a letter to the Prime Minister, Mr Blackford MP asked Boris Johnson, what representations, if any, have you made to President Trump on the murder of George Floyd and his administration's violent response and inflammatory rhetoric towards the Black Lives Matter protests? What separate representations has your government made to the US on these matters? And will you now instigate a review into UK exports of riot equipment to the US and confirm if there has been a violation of the UK's own export criteria? Chris, I think I'll let you loose with this one first of all. Obviously, this story is across all media everywhere at the moment, and the riots which this man's murder, it is being treated as murder, I gather now, by the authorities, but the death of this man has ignited massive riots across just about every state in the US, and it seems that the British Prime Minister has not got anything to say about this.
Yeah, well, thankfully now I'm led to believe that the policeman in question has now been charged with second-degree murder. And the three other officers are aiding and abetting to that murder. So hopefully something will come out of that and hopefully bring a bit of justice and a bit of closure for the family. But yeah, Ian Blackford's absolutely right. Boris has to make his position known. We know that Boris and Trump are very close, but at the same token, it's not unusual for a Prime Minister to chide the President over something that is, quintessentially wrong, and he shouldn't be afraid to do that. But it was noticeable last night. I couldn't get much sleep, and I put on Debate Night last night on the BBC, and Jamie Green was twice asked if he would condemn Trump, and he was absolutely scared to do so. I hope that's not the party line that he's towing, because at the end of the day, this has to transcend party politics. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Dave, if I could come to you for your response to this news today. I suspect, I don't know about you, but when I first heard this news, I was reminded so much of 1992 and the Rodney King. Was it Rodney King? I don't remember the man's name. But this seems so much like a carbon copy. The same thing happening
Yes.
again.
Yes, absolutely. It's this repetition. It's like we're on this merry-go-round, and although it's in many years, it's a cyclical thing that just keeps going round. But somehow I feel it's worse this time.
Yeah.
Far worse. Yeah. Is it because it's there in front of us in our living rooms that we can see it much more than we did in 1992?
One of the things I thought myself, Dave, and perhaps you might have an opinion on this, is that the reason it's ignited so much anger this time is the fact that nothing seems to have changed since 1992. That it's still going on.
Nothing seems to have changed, and yet everything has changed. I mean, you've only got to look at the kind of society that we've got now and our television programs, and there's no doubt that the ethnicity mix is there for us all to see, and we've all become used to it. Back in even 1992, that mix wasn't quite so obvious.
Okay. Well, so I'll move on to our next story this evening. This is also related to this story. And the Justice Secretary Hamza Yousaf has urged people planning to protest against racial injustice to do so in a way that safeguards them and the wider public from the ongoing threat of coronavirus and COVID-19. Yeah. Mr. Yousaf said, in the wake of the tragic death of George Floyd, it is again clear that the scourge of racism continues to blight every nation on earth, and all of us must play our part in tackling it. I fully understand and feel the anger and the sadness that leads people to want to gather together to show solidarity and community at this time. Unfortunately, the threat of COVID-19 is still with us, and I must urge people not to attend mass gatherings which pose a clear risk to public health, even with social distancing in place. The Scottish Government advice is still that no more than 8 people should meet at any one time, and for those people to be from no more than 2 households. I would encourage people to explore alternative ways to make their voices heard on this vital issue. In Scotland, we value the considerable and important role of our diverse minority ethnic communities. We cannot and will not tolerate hate crime, prejudice or discrimination of any kind. Chris, this obviously is a reaction to some of the scenes we've seen on our television screens in the United Kingdom, where people have clearly, I think most notably there was a rally, I think it was in Hyde Park, where thousands of people seemed to be jammed in together, and it was almost as if there was no COVID-19 at all.
Yeah, and I believe that rally went on to late in the night, and I seem to recall that it came to a head just outside Downing Street, and there were 13 arrests made. Excuse me. So. You know, the level of feeling is very high, and you know, we have to also remember that it is inherent on our shores as well. We only have to look back at Sheikh Obayo and you know, all the rest of it. So, you know, but I mean, I would like to draw the listeners' attention, and if you indulge me just a second, please,
yep.
That the Edinburgh Solidarity for Black Lives Matter have put a post out, and I'll just quickly skirt through it, that they are meeting at Holyrood Park on Saturday.
Uh-huh.
And due to the pandemic, they want to try and outline the health and safety measures. So if you're attending the rally, you must wear a mask and gloves. There will be stewards around if you've not been able to get your hands on some PPE. They will be outlining a 2-metre distance as a guideline for people to follow, and the stewards will be there to remind people of that. If you're not able to attend for any reason, or you would rather not attend,
Yep.
they will also be live streaming the rally on the Facebook events page, and you can show your solidarity by posting selfies of yourselves to show that level of support, because they want to make sure that everyone is safe and can take part. But if you are coming along, you will need to self-isolate for 14 days afterwards. Please take this into consideration if you're coming. So, what I'm outlining here is the fact that they are taking all the necessary steps. They realise that people do want to make their representations known, but we want to do it in a much organised and a much more safer way of doing it than what we've seen down in London.
Okay, well, it seems quite a big ask, Chris, as well, because they're asking people to self-isolate after the event as well.
Well, yeah, and I think that they're doing that for a reason, because they want people to really consider whether or not attending is going to be the best thing. They have also suggested further down the thread that it would be good if you made up a sign, hashtag Black Lives Matter, put it in your window, take a picture of that and post it onto the Facebook page and register your solidarity that way.
Okay.
Because what we have to remember is the fact that although the First Minister is saying, that she's outlawed, sort of like, well, not outlawed, but she's thinking large gatherings, they realise that the level of feeling is that people may not want to adhere to that. And also, if they are in a 5-mile radius of Holyrood Park, they can't do so. They can go, provided that they keep their social distancing.
Yeah, Chris, I should just remind people that Amar Anwar's announcement today was very specific, that people should not meet in groups of larger than 8. I know, despite the fact that people are very upset about this and they want to protest, to try and find safer ways of doing it if they can. Dave, from your point of view, do you have a comment on this? What do you think about the idea of people trying to show their support for the Black Lives Matter campaign in America and around the world?
Yes, I think that is not the safest way to make your point. And I think tackling Facebook might be a more effective way if you bombard Facebook with the kind of things that you were suggesting, given that the Facebook, what's he called again? The guy who runs Facebook.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes, Mark Zuckerberg. He's just allowing Trump to,
say what he wants.
The thing as a platform, which is going to incite more.
So you think, Dave, perhaps it would be better for people to throw their efforts into combating racism online rather than in person?
I do, because I think Facebook, when you look at the damage that Facebook has done across the globe in terms of the voting and all the other Cambridge Analytica stuff, that is a platform that the people should be taking back to themselves, instead of allowing these elites to use it as a platform for their evilness. I know that sounds a bit dramatic, but I'm really feeling angry about Facebook, and I'm wanting to come off it. But then, as somebody pointed out to me, then you wouldn't be able to have your community Facebook pages that are so useful. There's so much useful that's about Facebook.
Indeed.
But we need to take it back.
Okay, Dave, so you think we should rise up and take back Facebook,
Yes.
We have obviously other groups who disagree and want to get out there physically and show their faces in the streets. Amar Anwar, very specific though, that the Scottish government does not want people to do that kind of thing. They think it's likely to cause. I beg your pardon, Amar Anwar was saying this. Okay. We can move on to our next story, also related, incidentally, to this main story. Now, a Georgia investigator testified that one of the men who attacked Ahmaud Arbery, an unarmed black man who was fatally shot whilst jogging in February, used a racist slur against him. According to Richard Dial, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent in charge of the case, the man who filmed the fatal encounter said that Travis McMichael called Arbery a fucking nigger, and I'm using the words exactly as they're written here. After shooting him, McMichael apparently made the remark before police came on the scene, after shooting Arbery 3 times. McMichael and his father, Greg McMichael, were arrested last month and have been charged with murder and aggravated assault. Dial testified today during a preliminary hearing in the case, which is meant to determine whether probable cause exists to support the criminal charges. Arbery's killing sparked protests against police brutality, which intensified after the Memorial Day killing of George Floyd. The 2 men's names, along with with that of Breonna Taylor, have been chanted many times at protests in recent days. Now, apologies for my use of the language there. It was probably not appropriate. I'm sure I'll get lots of letters and emails about that. Chris, if I could come to you first. This seems to suggest there's still a pattern of police brutality, particularly against black men, and not necessarily black men who are doing anything illegal or violent. But this seems to be going on, and perhaps this might explain why the United States is aflame at the moment with riots.
Well, I mean, you know, this is a continuation. If you look back in history, Gordon, the United States of America has got a very bad record in the treatment of black people. And I would also suggest that they have a very, very shoddy treatment to anyone who is not white American. We have seen it against Mexicans, we've seen it against Hispanics, Islamists, anyone of different colour of skin, and it's that redneck mentality of white supremacy, which is absolutely shocking. Sometimes we do tend to look at it in a sort of like comedic way. The Confederate flag and the good old boys and the I don't know what it's called, the Dixie Lee car, the Dukes of Hazzard and stuff like that. But it is a nasty, nasty element. We look back, America actually electrocuted a 14-year-old boy back in 1942, I think, and 70 years later, it was proven that the jury were racist in wrongly convicting that young boy, and it was racially motivated that boy was actually sent to the chair. Okay. So it's something that America needs to look at, and it needs to look at seriously. And unfortunately, whilst they have got this loose cannon of a president, I'm afraid it's not going to be looked at, within the next couple of years anyway, unless they can get him out. Okay,
thank you for that, Chris. I'm going to move on to our next story, and we have actually just received a statement, and I'm going to read this out to you because it's just come in. It's a joint statement issued by Amr Anwar, the lawyer for Sheikh Obayo and his family and campaigner. Khadijatu Johnson, a nurse and sister of Sheiko Bayo, who died in police custody, Anna Sarwar, MSP, Labour, and Hamza Youssef, the MSP Cabinet Secretary for Justice. And it says, "We are united in our abhorrence of scenes of racial injustice in the United States and stand in complete solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and those demanding justice for George Floyd. Like so many, we want to stand in unity with millions across our planet. To show solidarity with those protesting against racial injustice in the United States of America, but also to support those challenging racial injustice and discrimination in Scotland." Just this week, the UK government had released a report showing that the BAME lives have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. The progress we have made in Scotland easing out of lockdown is fragile. The rules in place are there to protect people's health and ultimately people's lives. Therefore, as long-time anti-racist campaigners, we are urging people to abide by the rules set out by the Scottish Government. Now, I'd like to move on, if I may, to our next story, and we are crossing. I was going to say we're crossing the Atlantic, but we're actually going around the world here. People across almost all of the world's leading rich economies have turned more sceptical about their government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, with confidence slumping in the most in Britain, a survey showed on Thursday. In May, the group of 7 nations as a whole, 48% of respondents approved of how authorities had handled the pandemic, down from 50% in April and 54% in March. The survey published by polling firm Kantar showed. The UK government, the biggest drop, a sharp fall of 18 points from April to 51%, while in the United States, Canada, Germany, France and Italy, the declines ranged between 2 and 6 points. Japan was the only country to show an increase. The SNP has urged Boris Johnson to repair the damage of Dominic Cummings' scandal after a YouGov poll revealed 56%, that's plus 5% of people think that the Tory government is handling the coronavirus badly, the lowest approval rating since the crisis began. It follows a poll from Opinium published in The Observer on Sunday, which found Boris Johnson's net approval rating in the negative at negative 5%, down 11 points. Well, 2/3, or 66%, think that Johnson should have sacked Mr. Cummings, and 2 in 5, or 43%, said they have lost respect for the Tory government over its support for Mr. Cummings. Meanwhile, there are growing concerns the Tory government is taking a cavalier approach to coronavirus by seeking to rush to ease the lockdown measures despite warnings from public health experts in a way that could see infections rise. On Sunday, the Association of Directors of Public Health said it is increasingly concerned that Tory ministers are easing restrictions too quickly, with ADPH President Janelle de Grouchy warning that directors of public health are increasingly concerned that the government is misjudging this balancing act and lifting too many restrictions too quickly. In commenting, the SNP Health Secretary, Dr. Philippa Whitford, said, Boris Johnson must urgently repair the damage he has done to public health over the Dominic Cummings scandal. Okay, now we are moving to our next story straight away. Let me just first of all go to Chris on this last story. Okay, we'll discuss all of the story in a moment. Okay. Nearly 30,000 COVID-19 tests which the UK government sent to a United States laboratory for processing came back void, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's spokesman said on Thursday, adding to the mounting pile of questions over the UK government's rising testing regime. The admission comes in a week where the government has faced criticism by a statistics watchdog over incomplete test data, pressure over turnaround times for test results, and teething issues with the new Test and Trace programme. Johnson's spokesman said that operational issues in our lab network meant that 67,000 tests were sent to the United States for processing. Unfortunately, these tests from the US returned a higher void rate than expected. Around 29,500 were returned void, he said. Everyone affected was offered a new test immediately, and the lab in the United States is not being used for further capacity. According to The Telegraph, which first reported the story, the Junior Health Minister, James Bethell, said that Britain had worked quickly to restore its capacity. Now, I'd like to go straight to you, Dave, for this. Now, there's been a lot of talk about test and trace, but it seems that the British government has bungled a bit of this by the looks of this, sending what looks like we were given to believe that we're testing here in the UK, but it appears that they've been sending tests to the United States, and now we seem to have lost almost half of them. In some bizarre way, they've come back void.
You couldn't make it up, could you?
It is. It's rather weird, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, you just wonder what kind of deals are going on in the background. We'll give you this if you give us that.
Okay.
They've started their dealing already.
Okay. What about Dominic Cummings? I mean, the approval ratings for the Prime Minister have dipped sharply because he hasn't sacked Cummings. Do you think he even cares about his approval ratings?
No, clearly not, or he would have sacked him
you think
long ago.
Do you think Mr. Cummings is viewed as being too valuable a man, too key a figure?
I don't think that Boris Johnson has any control over whether he sacks Cummings or not. He's just another puppet like Cummings, another useful idiot that's being manipulated by other more powerful forces.
So you think they're actually...
And that will come out in the end. All this will come out in the end. We think that Boris Johnson is our Prime Minister. He's only the Prime Minister in name.
You think Boris Johnson is really just the front man for something much larger?
Yeah.
So what do you think the motivation is for driving us out of the EU and going apparently heading towards a no-deal Brexit?
Well, I think the evidence appears to be that there's an ideological process going on here within the Tory party. We've moved to the far right. So what's happening is that the far right wants to get rid of people who aren't working hard enough and contributing to the economy, and they think that this could be the way to do it. Anything that's going to be any of us that are a drag on the economy in this ideological weird world that they live in, this is the way to do it. Hence why they had the herd immunity thing as their front and centre.
Which they're now,
in the start.
Yeah, of course, they're now denying that as well. Chris, if I could bring you in at this stage here. Now, Boris Johnson's refused to sack Mr. Cummings. How much damage do you think Mr. Cummings has actually done to the fight against COVID-19 by his actions and by Mr. Johnson's actions in not sacking him?
I think it's insurmountable, and I honestly feel really, really sorry for vast majority of England, the vast majority of level-headed English people who must be shaking their heads and wondering what the feck is going on. We've had the Cummings gate. We've had the Richard Jenrick story. Now we've got Alok Sharma, who has just actually revealed that he spent 45 minutes with Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, raising the prospect that both of them might have to self-isolate for 14 days.
Yeah, was this
absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, was this the MP who, I think, was it yesterday? He was the business minister, and he was sweating profusely all the way through his speech.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, after the pantomime of the 1.5 kilometre long line.
Nonsensical the whole situation is at Westminster, where you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg telling people that they must go to Westminster in order to work. You've got Alok Sharma, clearly not well, although it does say that he has since been proven as not having COVID, but that's neither here nor there. I also seen a picture, excuse me, I also seen a picture yesterday of an MP who took her child, a baby child, into the chamber yesterday, and I'm thinking, are you mad? What are you doing?
Okay.
It is honestly, but I mean, I have said time and time again that I don't want to use COVID as an excuse
Right.
for Scottish independence, but by God, you know,
They're
we
making it
have
easy.
to give ourselves a shake and get away from this crowd.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to have to stop you there. We must move on, I'm afraid. And Scotland's rural industries face a double hammer blow if the UK government refuses to extend the Brexit transition period in light of coronavirus, the SNP has said. Analysis by the Scottish Government has found that agriculture and fishing sectors would face some of the highest trade costs if the transition period ends this year. In the event of a no-deal Brexit at the end of the transition, which the EU has made clear can be extended up to 2 years, these sectors would face tariffs and quotas when exporting to the EU. The SNP MSP Gillian Martin said rural Scotland cannot afford the double hammer blow of Brexit amidst the pandemic that is causing major economic disruption. This new research shows that Brexit will leave crucial agriculture and fishing sectors among the hardest hit. Businesses simply don't have the capacity to prepare for sky-high Brexit costs when they're fighting to survive the impact of the coronavirus COVID-19 crisis. To push ahead without extending the transition period would be a shocking dereliction of duty by the UK government, leaving Scotland's rural economy high and dry. Now, Dave, this is obviously a subject which I think would be close to your heart as a farmer. How do you see the situation? It looks like no-deal Brexit might be looming up ahead. What are your fears?
My fears are exactly the same as they were pre-2016. When all of this was laid out, it was explained to people what it would mean, and Tory voting farmers just poo-pooed it and said it was all scaremongering. Now, I'm tired of hearing it. It's the same old, same old. We know what's going to happen if it's a no deal. It's going to be bad enough coming out, never mind a no deal.
Well,
so I'm bored with it.
Yeah, much of Mr. Johnson's rhetoric surrounded things like the World Trade Organization rules, but what they forget to mention is those rules imply tariffs and taxes on goods coming into and out of the country. So surely those are going to massively ramp up the costs for farmers and fishermen.
Yes, but we knew all that. We knew that. NFUS knew it. NFU knew it. We all knew it. And yet, still they toadied up to the Tories, and, you know, Gove would come up to East Aberdeenshire and pat everybody on the hand and say it's all scaremongering and we will look after you.
Well, the truth of the matter is obviously, the EU has made it very clear that there would have to be tariffs. No matter whether they were low or high, there would have to be tariffs because they were trading from outside the region. Chris, do you have any remarks on this one? Farmers and fishermen. Now, Day has just been saying that many farmers, Tory voting farmers and fishermen, voted for Brexit. They must have known, surely, that this was going to happen.
The remarks I've got are not broadcastable, and you know, I can only echo exactly what Day is saying. That you know, they were told. It was clearly laid out, and I get upset when people say, "Oh, there was lies on this side and there was lies on that side." And it may very well be the fact that you know, there were a certain amount of lies on one side and a heck of a lot of lies on the other side. But what I mean, surely if one person says one thing and it doesn't ring true, and the other person proves it, then, you know, surely that's enough for you to go, aye, well, okay, maybe you've got a case there. But yeah, you know, and it's again, I go back to what I was saying earlier on. Let's just bring the MPs back, throw the football over the Hadrian's Wall and just say, you know, we're not playing anymore. And, you know, it's time to go to the EU and say, help us out, for God's sake.
Okay,
Yeah.
there have actually been some calls for Scotland to take a completely different approach and actually go past the UK and talk directly with the EU in the event of a no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, I would suggest that somebody needs to do that, and somebody needs to do that quickly, because what's coming down the line, bearing in mind the fact that we've got less than a month before we could possibly apply for a 2-year extension, which the Tories will never agree to the colour of you know what anyway. But something needs to be done then, and then if something's not done by then, representations by the Scottish Government must be made directly to the EU before the 31st of December. Or else, I honestly, you think that COVID is of biblical proportions? Just you wait until we come out of the EU. We are going to be driven back to the prehistoric era with you were talking about tariffs there, mate. Listen, you only have to look at the tariffs that are being put on the Scotch whisky at this moment in time.
Yeah.
And that should give you an indication as to what kind of tariffs are going to be applied if we go into a no-deal scenario. And the tariffs at the moment on Scottish whisky are eye-watering. And along with those tariffs as well, it is also taken away I can't remember it. Dale probably know exactly what I'm talking about, but it takes away the right for
the regional identity of the products, Chris. Yeah.
The identity of the product and all the rest of it. Yeah.
PGI, protective. Yeah.
Of course, Dave, you know more about this than many of us. That many products which are only manufactured in Scotland and have that unique branding are going to lose the protection. They're going to lose the protection they have with the EU, are they not?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Whiskey, actually, is different because they didn't get their PGI through the EU. I can't remember the details, but their PGI will still be their own PGI, as far as I know.
I think that they have a global sort of brand set up for Scotch whisky. And brand dominance as well. They even license production of whiskey in Japan, I believe. But that aside, we've still got things like Arbroath Smokies, and we've got Scotch pies, and we've got all kinds of other produce, which are. Although I'm lying, Scotch pies don't have that protection. I wish they did.
There are other products that
But
do.
of course, there are things like black pudding.
The other thing is that you've got Donald Trump there, who's already slapped tariffs onto whiskey, has he not? And
he drastically raised. Yeah, he drastically raised tariffs on malt whiskey. Actually, because we were part of the EU originally. Yeah. And that was his reasoning. He wanted to hit the EU with higher tariffs importing into America. But anything that puts trade barriers in Scotland's way is going to be bad news, I think. Anyway, I'd like to move on now to a little bit of what I think is good news. And the first edition of the new monthly released official statistics on crimes and offences recorded by the police in Scotland was released today. It provides information on the number of crimes and offences recorded during April 2020 and includes a comparison with the equivalent month of the previous year. The official statistics have been introduced to inform users about the volume and type of crimes and offences recorded in Scotland during the coronavirus pandemic. The main findings include that the number of crimes recorded by the police in Scotland was 18% lower in April of this year than it was in April 2019, reducing from 20,994 to 17,171 over the same period. Non-sexual crimes of violence were 14% lower, reducing from 740 to 636. Sexual crimes were 26% lower, reducing from 1,055 to 781. Crimes of dishonesty were 24% lower, reducing from 9,459 to 7,177. Fire raising, vandalism, etc. were 26% lower, reducing from 4,233 to 3,148. Other crimes remained relatively unchanged at 1% lower, reduced from 5,507 to 5,429. Fewer crimes were recorded by the police in all but 2 local authorities over the same time period. The number of offences recorded by the police in Scotland was 29% lower in April 2020 than in April 2019, reducing from 21,644 to 15,449. Miscellaneous offences were 16% lower, reducing from 11,047 to 9,306. Motor vehicle offences were 42% lower, reducing from 10,597 to 6,143. So it appears, Day, that the crime figures have reacted to the COVID lockdown. It must mean that the lockdown must have made it more difficult to commit a crime. Or at least it looks that way.
Surprise, surprise.
The criminals can't get out to commit the crime.
Or people are staying in their houses, so the criminals wouldn't be able to get in.
You would have expected, you would have expected perhaps there to be a spike in things like domestic violence, but I don't see that in the statistics here, which is a pity. It would be interesting to see how that was affected. Chris, what's your take on this? Crime is down for the month compared to last year by quite a significant amount.
And I hope this time next year we're not talking about a rise. You know, and it is right to say the fact that obviously we're staying in our houses more, we're not using our cars as much, so therefore there's less cars on the road that are not speeding and maybe not having an MOT certificate or the correct insurance or baldy tires and stuff like that. So and as you say, it's heartening to think that there hasn't been a rise in domestic violence. But on the whole, we have to be thankful, because at the end of the day, the police, I think, have got enough on their hands at the moment by trying to police the whole COVID-19 issue.
Of course, there must be other statistics that have been affected. I'm thinking largely of things like accident statistics on our roads must be down, surely.
Well, I mean, of course, again, with less vehicles on the road. But interestingly enough, actually, I think I read somewhere else that bike theft is actually up. Because there are more bikes, obviously, on the road now.
That's true.
The accidents involving bikes as well. There was a report out that an awful lot of cyclists are actually using the pavements. I was going to say sidewalks and all the rest of it. I don't know why. But and you'll know this thing yourself, that the whole chat of having to be proficient in using a bike and having to be obviously aware of bikes when you're in a car. There seems to be a cavalier attitude taken towards cycling in general now, because so many of us are now doing it.
Okay. Well, there's another part to this story, and that is that the Justice Secretary, Humza Yousaf, has said that many types of crime have fallen in recent months, and we know that some people have been using lockdown as a chance to commit offences, notably fraud, including targeting some of our most vulnerable citizens and exploiting businesses. He said we must remain vigilant to such criminals and also to the risks of harm against those who may be living in fear of abuse and violence within their own homes. I would urge anyone who has experienced or witnessed crime to continue to report it. He said, some women and children may feel very isolated now and need our help more than ever. My message to anyone experiencing domestic or sexual violence is absolutely clear. While you may feel vulnerable and unseen, you are not alone. Help from the police and support services is available round the clock. We know that criminals may also be using lockdown as a chance to exploit the vulnerable, especially those most at risk at home and in the care sector. This behaviour is absolutely abhorrent, and we, along with the police, are determined to pursue those who set out to cause harm and misery to our communities. It is it not hard to believe, Dave, that anybody would make people's lives more miserable than they already are by targeting, I guess they're looking at people perhaps in their older years who are isolated and by themselves. I'm not quite sure what kind of fraud they're talking about.
By the time you get to my age, you're not surprised at anything. And the depravity of the human race is just, it's unspeakable what some people will do. They just have no moral principles at all. You get that at one end of the scale. And then at the other end of the scale, you get people who are probably perfectly nice, normal people using lockdown freedom of a weekend to come out to the countryside and litter it.
Yeah, there's been a tremendous mess. I've noticed it myself. We all speak to each other and we all have certain moral codes and standards, and you tend to think that everybody's like ourselves. Unfortunately.
But they're not.
They're not, yeah. Anyway, I'd like to move on now. And during the COVID-19 crisis, it has affected other medical services. A new guidance has been published to help the NHS in Scotland to prioritise those most in need of cancer treatment. Whilst the majority of cancer treatments have been maintained during the coronavirus pandemic, the Framework for Recovery of Cancer Surgery sets out how health boards should prioritise cancer surgery as NHS Scotland resumes more services following the pandemic. Surgery will be set out in order of national clinical priority, and this guidance will ensure patients who are most in need can be offered the earliest available appointment, which could be out with their own health board. The National Cancer Recovery Group, chaired by Professor Aileen Keel, is being established to provide a complete oversight of all cancer services and the prioritisation. The Health Secretary, Jean Freeman, said the postponement or delay of some cancer treatments, knowing the profound impact that it would have on many people, was one of the most difficult aspects of dealing with the coronavirus. And that's why we're acting to ensure that the continued prioritisation of cancer as we begin to resume NHS services. We are asking health boards across Scotland to prioritise cancer treatment in the same way and work together to ensure patients are treated as early as is possible with those prioritisations. Now, Chris, coming to you first of all on this, many people have said for a while now that cancer patients have been kind of forgotten about. This is something I've heard a few times in social media, and it seems now that the Scottish Government is listening and is putting it right.
Yeah, well, you know, and it's not before time, and it's not just cancer patients as well. There are other people in society that rely on the health service for a number of non-invasive treatments, and they sadly can't get it at this moment in time.
Yeah.
But I mean, cancer obviously being the biggest one of all, and I think it's right that they start, excuse me, to reintroduce those services. And this again is a small indication that the Scottish Government is prepared to again slowly try and get back to some sort of normality, you know, in day-to-day life. So again, I would urge everybody to carry on doing what they're doing, and you know, help the government to help the NHS get back up to near as possible, you know, 100% operational.
Okay.
Because that bearing in mind the fact, Gordon, as well. all the time we're seeing the COVID figures thankfully going down. Remember that we haven't had to use the Louisa Jordan.
No, they haven't. That's true.
And
the hospital.
I think, although they're not going to take that facility away tomorrow, but it does mean that there is a lot more provision within the health service to actually get on with some of these necessary treatments.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Dave, one of the things that struck me about this story is that, as Chris was saying, that we know that the coronavirus infection rate is slowly coming down now, and for the government to start prioritising what we would call sort of more normal and urgent cancer surgeries, surely this must be an indication that they feel now that they've got a grip on the COVID virus, and perhaps now they can start to rebuild what the NHS, the strength of the NHS, so long as people follow the rules, yes. Obviously.
Yes, and that's the key point. And the First Minister stressed last week how nervous she was about releasing a little bit of lockdown, doing it step by step. And what did people do? The irresponsible amongst us, and there always are those irresponsible amongst us, they abused it. And they took, they could possibly have taken the virus to our rural areas.
Yeah.
We won't know yet for another couple of weeks.
Because somewhere in the region, I think it was about 700 and some nearly 800 large gatherings had to be broken up by the police as well, we were hearing just recently. So I often wonder, Dave, whether the mixed messaging that we're getting from what is basically a British media,
down south,
do you think that is causing this confusion?
I think it's absolutely. You've got that government down there giving a message to England and Wales. No, to England.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Tory parties. In fact, all the unionist parties up here adding to that mixed message and complaining, and why didn't you, and why should you, and what all this nonsense. And then you've got the media in the mix.
Yeah.
And you've only got to listen to the First Minister's briefings and listen to the nonsense, and some of it really irresponsible that they're coming out with.
Well, obviously, one of the reasons why Broadcasting Scotland exists in the first place is to give an alternative news media, which we hope is more neutral and able to report the news without confusing people. At least that's our aim, anyway. Anyway, after that little endorsement from me, we shall move on. And the Scottish Funding Council is to consider its model in light of COVID-19. Ministers have commissioned work on the future provision and sustainability of colleges and universities in light of coronavirus COVID-19. The Scottish Funding Council, the SFC, will review the provision and delivery of teaching and research activity across college and university sector, as well as how activity will be funded. The SFC paper published in April showed that universities face operating deficits between £383 million and £651 million in the academic year 20 to 21 alone, while the college sector faces significant challenges as a result of loss in income and increased costs. The Minister for Further Education, Higher Education, Science, Mr. Richard Lochhead, said, "Our colleges and universities are showing tremendous adaptability and ingenuity in meeting the challenges of COVID-19. Yet we know the financial impact could run into hundreds of millions of pounds in lost income. Further and higher education and the research sector must emerge out of this crisis even stronger by being at the heart of our economic recovery, delivering on our skills, needs and maintaining its world-leading reputation. And I'm clear we will need to shift to meet those challenges. So the Scottish Funding Council will look at how its existing models of funding, governance and delivery can exploit new opportunities and continue to support our world-class further and higher education systems." Chris, if I might take you first on this one. I have a young son who is about to go to university, and he doesn't know as yet quite what university is going to be like when he attends. This loss to the university seems absolutely massive. You're talking over half a
It certainly
billion pounds.
is. In contrast, actually, I've got a son who's just graduated. He's a Bachelor of Arts or something like that.
Yep.
Funnily enough, in politics. Think my fair play to you, Scott. Well done. You got a lot further than your father could ever dream of. I think colleges and universities, they've got again an insurmountable task on their hands.
Yeah.
Because of the loss of funding, but also as well the fact that they are going to be losing again. Because of the possibility of the Erasmus programme not being quite what it was, shall we say. There's still a bit of dubiety,
Chris,
about the foreign students and stuff like that.
Okay.
So,
Chris, can I stop you there for a moment? I'd like to bring Day in on this. Chris mentioned the Erasmus programme, which of course is the European research programme allowing students to study across the EU. Very quickly, Dave, what do you think of this current sort of state of affairs with our education system?
Well, with regard to the Erasmus programme, I'm absolutely heartbroken. We took part in it last year, and it was one of the most educationally exciting programmes that I've ever been on, and I've been on a few.
Uh-huh.
And the links that we've made in France with French farmers they'll live with me forever. And we had 2 other students going to come this year. But sadly, a few weeks ago, I got an email saying that unfortunately they would have to cancel it because, all the different things. It was just too insurmountable to keep going. But what we gained from our experience last year, you could not put a price on it for those of us involved. So it was at this end, it was just my 3 young farmers and myself. But at that end, it was all the students at the college and the farmers where we paid a visit to. And we've all got wonderful, amazing memories and links that were created.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I'm going to move to our final story this evening. A new report outlines the dramatic increase in supplies of personal protective equipment, or PPE, in Scotland since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, ensuring that frontline workers are able to access vital equipment that they need. The Scottish Government, in partnership with NHS, Scottish Enterprise, the National Manufacturing Institute Scotland and private companies, has increased both the volume of PPE being manufactured in Scotland and the amount being imported from abroad. Supplies of visors, gowns, aprons and ventilators have all seen unprecedented increases. And the NHS National Services Scotland is now supplying more than 4.6 million surgical masks per week, 50% more than the total for the whole of the previous year. NSS is also now supplying 11 million medical gloves per week to health boards, an increase of over 120%. And the public and private sectors have collaborated to meet the vastly increased demand for sanitizer, the equivalent of over a decade's worth of normal supplies in just a few months. So our final story, Chris, this is a good news story. Scotland has now got a vibrant PPE industry by the side of things.
Yeah, and it's reaching out to different industries as well. I believe that the ethanol that was supplied for the hand washing making was supplied by White & Mackay.
Yeah.
You've got garment makers down in the borders, down the coast of Solway. And they're sending up their raw product to somewhere else further up in the Highlands, and they're making things. And so, it is a very, very good story. And the regular listeners, all 3 of them, will, recall me saying that Ivan McKee has done a fantastic amount of work in the procurement of PPE from Europe, But what we now see is Scottish innovation
As well.
diverging into setting up new businesses
Okay.
in order to help the supply chain.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Dave, if I could just bring you in quickly before we finish the show
Yeah.
this evening. I even heard that the French wine producers who couldn't sell their wine are now selling it for the bioethanol as well.
Yes, I'm not surprised. And I know that one or two farmers are selling their product. They were making gin, I think.
Yeah.
And they've started to produce the alcohol, I think, that is needed as well for the alcohol cleaning and what have you. And also, I'm just interested to know the garments that are needed for protective clothing. You said they were coming from the Solway, Chris. I'm wondering if that the firm Solway products, and their plastic comes from the black liner that you see in a farmer's field over the silage bales, the silage wrap. That gets collected and it goes down to Solway, and that's the name of the company, and they make more plastic wrap. They also make furniture for gardens that comes from that. There's a vast amount of stuff that they make. So if they're doing that as well, that's really interesting, and it just shows how diverse our economy is and how quickly it can be adapted because we're reasonably small and manageable.
Yeah. Okay, Dave, listen, thanks very much. I'm going to have to wrap things up now, where I've come to the end of our time this evening. It just remains for me to do my usual duty, which is if you would like to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland and support us financially on a regular basis, you can do so by following the directions on your screen now, going to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. That's it from Broadcasting Scotland's Scotland at 7 show this evening. My thanks to both Dave Tucker and Chris McCusker, and I'll be back on Thursday. Until then, good night. Ray.